Video by the Youth Political Activism channel. Today I'm going to be extending the video that I made on YouTube Shorts and TikTok for the Nikki Haley versus Joe Biden 2024 election prediction and making it in long form so I can further explain my state opinions on each one, which candidate it's going to go to, and then also just like delve deeper into the polling that we have thus far for Nikki Haley and Joe Biden and also the 2024 race in general. We've already made videos on Joe Biden versus Ron DeSantis and Joe Biden versus Trump, if you want to check those out. And then we have shorts on a plethora of other candidates. And then one last disclaimer, by making this video, I'm not necessarily saying that Nikki Haley is going to become the Republican nominee. I don't think she is, but if she does, then, this is the outcome that I predict. And then the same thing goes for Joe Biden. We don't know. He hasn't announced if he's running yet or not. And I'm not saying that he's going to become the Democratic nominee if he does run, but just making the selection prediction if the scenario were to play out. And then just as a disclaimer, an overall overview of what's going on so far for 2024, we have 3 Republicans that are running, most notably Donald Trump, and Nikki Haley, who's polling far behind, and then this guy who I'm not familiar with at all, only became familiar with him recently when he decided to run for president, but he's obviously not going to win or receive the nomination. And on the Democratic front, we have Marianne Williamson, who, if you remember, ran for 2020, dropped out in January of 2020, didn't do too well. One of the earliest people to drop out. She's an author, I believe. She doesn't have much experience in politics, but she is the first and only Democrat to have announced her candidacy. Again, Joe Biden has not announced yet, but he's expected to run. And then there are all these other Republicans, most notably Ron DeSantis, who are expected to run. And then other people such as Larry Hogan on the Republican front and Gavin Newsom on the Democratic front have already said that they're not going to be running. And then just looking at further polling, first of all, on the Republican front, we have Nikki Haley, which is who we're looking at for the Republicans today. She's polling very poorly, especially for this early in the race when there are only, one other notable candidate in the race, that being Trump. She's polling really bad. She's polling behind 2 people that haven't even announced their candidacies yet. And to be fair to her, Ron DeSantis is very popular on the national level, but Mike Pence hasn't announced anything yet. He hasn't even alluded to running at all, versus Ron DeSantis somewhat has been alluding. But she's doing very poorly. If 5.8 average, falling far behind Donald Trump. And so again, I don't think that she'll become the nominee, but this just goes to show how the nation is feeling about her, how the Republicans are feeling about her on average. But again, this does change when you're looking at a Republican versus a Democrat. She's going to win over most of the Trump vote and DeSantis vote and everything else if she were to become the nominee, which is what we're looking at today. But overall, I don't think she'll become the nominee. And then on the Democratic front, we have Biden polling ahead of everyone else by large margins, Harris being second place. And again, Harris is also pretty unpopular nationwide. I wouldn't expect her to be second place. Before looking at this, I would have thought that Bernie Sanders would be second place, but that's the way it goes. And then Marianne Williamson, who is the only Democrat, again, to have announced her candidacy, isn't even polling in single digits thus far. She's not going to win. Her candidacy is more of a a soft power move, she's not going to win. She knows she's not going to win, but it's more to make a stance and show the nation where she wants the country to be headed politically, with her, progressive beliefs along the lines of Sanders and Warren, but she's not going to win. And again, just the other candidates as well, and then we'll get back to Nikki Haley and Joe Biden specifically. Harris, I don't think she's going to run, especially if Biden is going to run, which he probably is. Sanders, I don't think he's going to run. He's already had at least 2 failed presidential runs, and he's getting very old now. He's older than Joe Biden. I don't know his exact age, but, in the 80s. And so he's old, and though he doesn't raise the same concerns as Joe Biden does, Joe Biden seems to have more problems with memory and speaking capabilities than Sanders does. Sanders seems to be pretty sharp. For the most part, Sanders is still old, and that is something that should be considered on some level. And then Buttigieg, unpopular, especially after what happened in Ohio. Clinton, she's not going to run after what happened in 2016. That's enough drama for her to deal with. And then Warren Klobuchar, the rest of these people are just No. And Newsom obviously said that he's not going to be running if Biden does run, which he probably is. And then lastly, the last real clear thing we're going to be looking at is from the election that I'm going to be making a prediction for today, which is Nikki Haley versus Joe Biden. And surprise, surprise, Joe Biden polls ahead of her. Again, these are like the election predictions I make. I'm not making them for the candidate I prefer most. I'm making them really truly on what I think. Again, it's going to be somewhat biased because as humans, there's no way for us to take our bias out of things, but I try to be as unbiased as possible, and I really think that this is what's going to happen, is that Joe Biden's going to win. Now, what margin she's going to win out, we'll see. Though, you know, I changed, actually, my election prediction that I made on the YouTube Shorts showed Nikki Haley winning, but we'll go state by state, see if anything changes on that front. But, yes. And then going to the actual thing, so I'm just going to fill in the safe states. These don't really have much explaining to do. Pretty much the same for every presidential run, for the most part. The Democratic states always being the coastal states, and then the Republican states being the more rural states. And then I'm going to be like somewhat messing around here, or let me change this. Okay. And then lastly, Maine's 2nd district and Nebraska's 2nd district as well. Okay, this seems good. So now we have like the main states, although Ohio is like a solid color, but we'll get into that later. So Ohio, the only reason I would say that it's like lean rather than solid is just because what we've seen out of Ohio. They do have some Democratic values, but what I'm really looking at in Ohio is the Senate results from 2022, where we saw J.D. Vance pull ahead of Tim Ryan by 6%. Again, that's not enough for Ohio to be a solid red state, but it is it is enough, surely, for a likely. And then West Virginia, and go back and forth whether it's whether it's a lean red or a solid red. You know, they have one Democratic and one Republican senator. Their Democratic senator being one of the most famous senators, Joe Manchin, who's, you know, obviously called a dino in most scenarios, Democrat in name only, because he tends to side more with the Republicans on main issues and has been a major block to Biden's agendas in the House, or in the Senate, sorry. But I still think that West Virginia is pretty solidly red, especially when you look at their House races. If we could just do that for a sec. Okay, West Virginia, only 2 House seats, but both of them being won by like 30% at least in both scenarios. So West Virginia is very solidly red, and that's why I give it the solid red, though I could see it be a lead as well. And then the secondary states. So for the Democrats, it's going to be Colorado and New Mexico, Wisconsin, not Wisconsin, Virginia, and then Iowa, Texas. Honestly, Texas goes more, not lean. This is likely. This is lean and this is likely. Yes. So Texas goes lean red for me. Again, if we look at some of the 2022 results, they obviously didn't have any Senate races, but when we look in the House, even though it's like very disproportionately gerrymandered, like Texas is one of the worst gerrymandered states in the union. They have one congressional district that I think is like 500 miles long or something like that. It stretches from like central Texas all the way to the southern border. They have completely gerrymandered it, and yet the Democrats do still have like sizable like representation in Texas. And then their governor, Greg Abbott, that was a really good race for the, sorry if I can find this, Greg Abbott did win, but Beto O'Rourke winning by, losing by 11 percentage points, which again isn't that much, especially for Texas. You'd expect it to be more when there's so much, we see so many really far right leaning bills and things happening in Texas with things such as abortion and gun laws, but Texas is somewhat mixed. And so I don't think that it's fair to say that's a solid red. Never mind a likely red, it's more of a lean. And Beto O'Rourke, he's ran for governor, twice now. He ran for president. I think the problem might more be him than anything else. And then just looking further back at Texas in particular, if you go to, say, the House results in Texas, we see here that there's, like, again, the same amount of representation that there is now, pretty much. 13 to 23, that not being too good for the Democrats. But when you go back, same thing, slightly more red. And so, like, we see that Texas is becoming, like, more and more, like, blue or mixed as we go further and further back. And so in the last, like, decade or so, or, decade, half decade, however you want to say it, Texas has become more blue and, like, more open to Democrats holding public office. So that's why I give it likely instead of lean or anything else. In my election prediction that I did on the YouTube short, I think I gave it a lean, not a likely, not a lean. This is lean, this is likely again. Sorry for the mix up there. And now going on to Iowa. So Iowa is pretty interesting to me. All 4 of their House seats were won by Republicans, but as you see, not by much. This one, obviously, 30-point lead by the Republican. That's a lot. But when you look at, like, the other states, or the other districts, this one less than 1%, this one, like, less than 10%, and this one about, like, 6%, okay? So you see that these aren't, like, really, other than Iowa's 2nd district, these are pretty competitive, and I think that that's different from what we see in West Virginia, for example, which I gave a solid red, and that's why I was, like, likely, because it just, like, the Democrats that run in Iowa have more of a chance than they do in most of the neighboring states. And they don't, like, the Republicans don't win by as sizable of figures as they do in, say, Nebraska or Kansas, other states that are very solidly red. And then when we look at Iowa, they're, like, it's interesting, Iowa, because first of all, it's the first state to be polled, the Iowa caucus for, presidential primaries, and, like, what they do with that, which I actually was reading about the history of that. Sorry to go on a tangent, but I think it was just because it's not even for any specific reason, just because they filed for it first or something like that, or they need more time to process the votes. But Iowa, nevertheless, very interesting to see what happens out of that, especially now that we're looking more into 2024, and we have at least one, and most likely 2, Democratic candidates. And so back to this, every district is, like, very heavily, or every state, is very heavily gerrymandered nowadays, except for, say, California and Oregon and a few other states that have kind of intensified their laws around gerrymandering and made it so that they're more competitive districts. But what we see in Kansas, what we see in Texas, what we see in Chicago is very disheartening. In Iowa, same story there. And so Iowa's, like, really mixed. As you see here, it's like 3-1, 3-1 again, 3-1, but on the flip side, and then 3-1 again, and then obviously in this year, 2022, it being 4-0 for the Republicans. Yeah, that's Iowa. Might have spent a bit too much time on that. But now to Michigan and Minnesota. This won't surprise most of you. And we also have to do Virginia and the rest of these Democratic states. So to do those 5, just, in one fell swoop. First of all, we have Colorado. Where's Colorado? Pretty normal for what you see with Colorado. It's a left-leaning state. They have a lot of liberal laws in place. Same goes for Colorado in pretty much every election. If we just go to this, like, we see Colorado being blue in, like, every race up till 2004, and, before that, like, and this is just looking at the Reagan map, but, when you look at most of these races in recent history, you've seen, like, Colorado and New Mexico being 2 blue states in a sea of red here, so that's pretty normal and expected. And then when you also look at the House races for 2023, which again, 5 for the Democrats, 3 for the Republicans in Colorado, and then all 3 going to the Democrats in New Mexico. So this is pretty much expected. The only reason I wouldn't give them full red is because they do have some races go to the Republicans more so than the rest of these solid states, and races are more competitive. Same goes for like all the states that are like clear lean rather than solid. But just going now to the like, I guess is I wanted to say Rust Belt, but Minnesota isn't really a Rust Belt state now, is it? But going to Minnesota and Wisconsin, the northern states, Minnesota, first of all, same sort of deal here. 4-4 is pretty much tied between the Democrats and the Republicans, but both of their senators are Democrats, Amy Klobuchar and Tina Smith, I believe, is the other one. And then in Michigan, it being skewed slightly towards the Democrats. And then I believe is it both of their senators? I believe so. Let's just check that to make sure. Well, they didn't have any races, but if we go back here to the Senate, so we have Peters is one. Oh yes, Peters and Stabenow, I think, is the other one. Yes, Stabenow, both Democrats, and so they also have that. And Michigan also has a Democratic governor, and so even though their House seats are fairly split between Democrats and Republicans, overall on the state and federal level, it seems to be mostly towards the Democrats. And the same thing goes for Minnesota, and so just likely, yes. Wait, no. This is lean. Sorry, lean and likely keep on messing me up. But lean, just because, they're not as Democratic as California. I think we can all agree on that. Next up, Virginia as well. Sorry, I keep on forgetting about Virginia. Virginia, same thing. Virginia seems to vote like similarly in most elections. Blue, 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 red. Just in 2004, though. In 2004, the demographics were considerably different, and so just looking at probably 2012 till now is most relevant, but obviously 2020 and 2016 being the states that we look at the most. Clinton winning it by 5.3 in 2016, and then Joe Biden winning it by 10.1, which is very sizable proportion for a state like Virginia, which is more mixed, but there we have it there. And then next up, Florida. I should have done this earlier before I did Texas, but likely red. Florida, as we all know, they're very, dare I say, popular or provoking. Governor Ron DeSantis, he's obviously brought a lot of far right laws and policies to Florida, and he's made his impact there, and then both of their senators as well are Republicans, Rick Scott and Marco Rubio, and they've obviously gerrymandered the state really poorly really badly. Well, how do I say this? They've gerrymandered it. They've done a great job at gerrymandering it, which is bad. That's what I'm trying to say here. But the good thing is that they brought the first Gen Z congressperson in the Miami area, I think it was, or Orlando. I'm going to get blamed for not knowing my Florida geography. I apologize there. Maxwell Frost being the first Gen Z, but then the rest of Florida being pretty solidly red. The funny thing is that now we think of Florida as such a hardcore red state, when in the past, Obama won it in both his elections, and yet now it's taken such a turn and we don't see it as a Democratic state at all, or even a swing state. I remember in 2016, there was a lot of talk about what was going to happen with Florida, whether it was going to go to Trump or Clinton. Obviously, ended up going to Trump. But since then, Florida hasn't leaned blue at all. It's the opposite. It's leaned Republican heavily, and we'll probably be seeing that for a while. I've seen some pushback against the Republican leadership in Florida, but not a significant amount to make an impact on the state legislature, nor its election patterns on where or who it votes for on the presidential level. So that's Florida. Next up, South Carolina and North Carolina. So I might have said that within Southern drawl. Again, I should have done these earlier as well. But South Carolina, North Carolina, those being also somewhat self-explanatory. I feel like I could go to likely with South Carolina instead of North Carolina, but the only reason is because not just looking at like past election results, but also looking at the candidates themselves. Like Nikki Haley is going to have a better draw to the Southern voters than Joe Biden is, and Joe Biden is going to have a better pull on the Rust Belt voters. That's where they come from. And South Carolina specifically is a state in which Nikki Haley was the governor, and she seems to be very popular there. And so that's just South Carolina. It's probably going to be that way for a while. And I don't see it going to Joe Biden at all. And I think that most of the legislature, or most of the constituents in South Carolina, will be voting for Nikki Haley since it's their candidate. And comment down below, just as today's question of the day, has there ever been a president in the White House hailing from South Carolina? Comment down below. And just as another quick fact, I think that the most presidents have come from Virginia and Ohio. I think those might be tied for first or something, or one or the other might be first, and then second or third place, I think, is Massachusetts. So a lot coming from both Ohio and Virginia. But never mind that. North Carolina, same story there. Just looking at the voting patterns, really solidly, blue for Obama, but that's not surprising. And then red for the most part. Yep. You go back and back and back. Though these elections obviously aren't relevant to today's elections. Walter Mondale, RIP. And then going back here. Now, this is where it gets interesting for me, at least. I think that these 5 states that we see on the screen now are the states that are going to decide this election, whether it's Nikki Haley and Joe Biden, whether it's Trump and Joe Biden, whether it's Ron DeSantis and Joe Biden, or any of those 3 people, and another Democratic figure is probably going to be Joe Biden, and if he doesn't run, possibly, I don't know, Bernie Sanders if he decides to run, which he probably won't, Harris probably, again, I don't think she'll decide. I mean, if Joe doesn't run, then she'll probably run, but then we'll have a much different race on our hands. But I think that these 5 states are probably the most important ones that we need to be looking at in future elections. Firstly, off Pennsylvania. This might be controversial, but I think that Pennsylvania is a tilt blue state. So, my reasoning. Let's just go to the map, first of all. When you look at the presidential level, Biden won it in 2020 by 1.2 points. Now, he won it against who? Donald Trump, who at the time had some controversies, his major one probably being not January 6th, that hadn't happened yet, but COVID and how he handled that situation. But after coming out of January 6th, he's obviously not going to have as strong a pull on any of these states that he had at that time, and so Joe Biden would only have a stronger case for 2024 against Trump. But when we're looking at Nikki Haley, a few things. So first of all, Nikki Haley is obviously a woman, and that comes with its own set of challenges and prejudices. It's not a secret that female politicians are much more unliked and unfavorable than male politicians. And also her having a Southeast Asian or South Asian background that could possibly come to play in any of these states. But in Pennsylvania, I think, especially since Joe Biden is from there and he has those roots there, that will only make for a stronger case for him in that state. And I don't think that, especially with the way that things are going for Pennsylvania, like if we go to the Senate race, John Fetterman won Pennsylvania, flipped it from, who's the incumbent before? Sorry, I'm blanking on the name. I remember their name, but comment down below their name. Who used to be, Pat Toomey. He won the state over from Pat Toomey, who was a Republican, to him obviously beating a Democrat, winning by 5 points over Mehmet Oz, which this race was expected to be a pretty competitive race, but didn't end up being so too much. Like the 5-point lead, it was expected to be much closer, probably more like Georgia, in which Raphael Warnock only won by 2%, and probably less than that. It's probably, the raw numbers are probably less than 2. But in Pennsylvania, John Fetterman winning by a pretty sizable proportion. Though, now, let's not get too ahead of ourselves. That could also be because Mehmet Oz was a pretty unlikable candidate. He wasn't actually from Pennsylvania. He had voted in a Turkish election in 2018. He didn't really appeal to the Trump voters as much in that Trump base. I mean, of course, Trump gave him his support, but other than that, like with the rest of the Republicans, we could have seen much different results in Pennsylvania if instead of Mehmet Oz being the Republican candidate, it would have been like McCormick was his name, who was the runner-up, who he probably would have won. He was a favorite before Trump endorsed Mehmet Oz, but obviously we know what the Trump endorsement did was that it only put the Republican that he wanted forward, but in most states didn't end up winning against the Democrat. We saw that happen in Pennsylvania, we saw it happen in Georgia, Arizona, Nevada. A lot of these swing states, Trump didn't end up getting his way. And so that's my case on Pennsylvania. And then just looking at the House races in Pennsylvania. Okay, so this is pretty split as well, 9-8 for the Democrats, which only further supports this tilt blue that I have here. So that's that. Now, next one up is Georgia. Now, this is also, again, a very hard state to decide. This was one of the most important states, Pennsylvania and Georgia, probably the two most important states in deciding the 2020 election. And also in the primaries, the midterms in 2022, those states were under intense battle between the Republican and the Democrat, mostly Georgia. There had to be a runoff on December 6th because there wasn't a candidate that won over 50% in the regular election in November. And so Georgia is obviously very intensely split. And so a couple of reasons, just before we look at the raw numbers of Raphael Warnock versus Herschel Walker, something to take into consideration all these races is not just who won, the Democrat or the Republican, but to look at the values and the extremeness of the two candidates and compare those. So first of all, Raphael Warnock, a pretty moderate to progressive new candidate in the Democratic sphere. He had been a senator, but only won in a special election in 2020. He didn't win as a full-time senator, so this is his first actual 6-year term that he's going to be in. And then Herschel Walker being a extremely far-right, Trump-endorsed candidate who had no political experience, who seemed to be a pathological liar on every front. And so him not being in the political space at all and not having any experience and not seeming to have many moral values either. Again, this is my opinion shining through, but him being that sort of candidate and going against Raphael Warnock, who seemed to be a pretty, he's a pastor, he's a reverend. He has that type of background that would appeal to Southern voters. And yet he won by such a small percentage. Now, looking at the actual race, what was it? Again, 2%, less than 2%. That's how much Raphael Warnock almost lost by. So that's why I think that, again, Nikki Haley's pull on Southern voters is going to be much more than Joe Biden's. And I think that Joe Biden hasn't, he obviously has his own challenges within his presidency of things he hasn't delivered on. And I don't think that if he's able to make major reparations to voters in a lot of these like swing states and southern states, Midwestern, this area specifically, if he's not able to deliver actual concrete benefits to these states like he promised to, then he's not going to see the voter turnout for him in these states, especially Georgia. And I think that Nikki Haley is a much more promising candidate to these southern voters than Biden. So that's that. Next up, these are probably the 3 toughest states for me to decide. And these are the states that are going to decide who's the winner at this point. Okay, sorry. If I give any of these states at this point to except for Nevada, of course, because their electoral college votes are so low, then the Democrat wins. So if I give either Arizona or Wisconsin to Joe Biden, he wins the race. Now, will I do that? I'm not sure. So let's go through this together because these 3 states, especially Wisconsin, is one that really interests me. So just going off of Wisconsin, we had a Senate race in 2022 versus, who was it, Johnson and, his name started with a B. Sorry, this is really bad. I don't remember his name. Oh, yes, Barnes. So Ron Johnson and Mandela Barnes. First of all, Mandela Barnes being a younger candidate, I believe, and him, again, being in the moderate sphere, not really progressive, more moderate leaning. And then Ron Johnson being an extremist candidate. that a really far-right extremist, big lie supporting candidate was able to win in Wisconsin over a moderate over a moderate Democrat. That means something. If it were a moderate Republican and moderate Democrat, you could make the case for Joe Biden, but because like a really strong leaning Republican won the race, that's going to be towards Nikki Haley. And you may say, well, who's the other senator from Wisconsin? And that's going to be Tammy Baldwin, who's a lesbian woman elected. I think she's running for re-election again in 2024, otherwise 2026. But that means she was elected a while ago when Wisconsin was voting differently, when the nation was different. You know, every year the nation seems to be changing in such dramatic ways. Like in 2020 and 2022, there were a lot of races that we wouldn't have predicted ended up the way they would. And so we can't necessarily say that because of Tammy Baldwin winning, who is more of a progressive Democrat, that necessarily speaks to the state, because obviously they just voted in recently, less than 6 months ago, a far-right extremist to the Senate. So that speaks more than Tammy Baldwin. And then just more in Wisconsin, because first of all, I think it's a really interesting state. So in 2020, Biden won it by 0.63. That's almost as tight as Georgia. A very small win by Biden in that state. Wisconsin's very tight. And then before that, Trump won it. Before that, Obama won it. Before that, Obama. But like Wisconsin, we saw similar things with Florida. It's becoming more and more red. Trump won it by 0.76. So no matter what, it's going to be extremely tight. It's going to be a tilt, red or blue. But because of what we've been seeing in Wisconsin, and just to further this with the House, Wisconsin, 2 to what is it, 6? It's going to be a tilt red for me. Oh, yes, okay, that's correct. And then our last two states, Arizona and Nevada. And again, these results are going to be different from the results that I showed on the YouTube short / TikTok, but you know, that's it comes with time and also the polling and stuff, so don't be upset the results are different. But last two states. Here we have Nevada and Arizona. So just looking at this first of all. Nevada always seems to vote to the left of Arizona. It's a more liberal state, if you will. You see all these elections, Nevada being either a lighter shade of red or a shade of blue that Arizona isn't. Well, I'm really interested in 2016. So in 2016, Trump won Arizona by 3.5, Hillary won Nevada by 2.4. Next, Biden won both the states, Arizona by 0.31, which again, the tightest in the nation. Just following Georgia is mere percentage points here. And then Nevada by 2.4. So either way, I think, especially if he races in Nevada specifically, because I'm going to do Nevada and then Arizona. But firstly, the House. In Nevada, we have 3-1. In Arizona, we have 36. So obviously we see that the Republicans have a favorable majority in Arizona versus the Democrats have a more favorable majority in Nevada. I might have said those states' names wrong, but hopefully you guys understood that. And then with the governor races, Katie Hobbs won in Arizona. But again, looking at the type of candidates these people were, Katie Hobbs won by like 0.6%. And Kari Lake, who is a very far right candidate, versus Katie Hobbs, not progressive, more of a moderate. And so, again, when you see this change in how a Democratic moderate is barely winning or losing to very far-right extremists, that says a lot about the state. Like, what if Kari Lake were a moderate Republican? Then we probably would have seen her win. And then also looking at, where is Nevada? Yes, Joe Lombardo winning from Steve Sisolak. This one was, I expected Joe Lombardo to win in this race as well. And he doesn't seem to be extremist at all. He's morely, even though he was endorsed by Trump, he seems to be more of a moderate and doesn't deals much with the culture wars as say Kari Lake did. But again, this also speaks to Nevada. But I think I have my decision here. Hopefully you guys agree. What am I going to pick? Okay. Nevada, tilt blue. And Arizona, tilt red. And there we have it, folks. Nikki Haley wins by a very small margin. I think that's very... Looking at this on the grand scale, first of all, Nikki Haley, you wouldn't expect her to win. So that's the first thing, is that Nikki Haley is this underdog in this situation. And again, I don't expect her to win the Republican nomination at all. I think that either Trump's going to get it or DeSantis is going to get it. And if DeSantis wins it, then Trump's going to run third party, and that's going to mess up the electorate even more. But Nikki Haley, representing the Republican values here, negative partisanship is going to come into play fully if in this election if these are the two candidates. And what I mean by that is that we see the better of the lesser of two evils. Republicans are going to side with their side because it's more about the power and the control of the White House than it is about the actual candidate. And the same goes for Democrats as well. They just want a Democrat being in office. And, they'd rather have a candidate that isn't as experienced, isn't their first choice, because most of their first choices are either Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis, than have Joe Biden again, which his presidency being very contentious and controversial only adds to their fears. So that's that. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Check out the shorts that we make. We've made a lot of fun ones, including Ben Shapiro versus Bill Maher, one on George Santos versus literally anybody else. Make sure to follow the TikTok at bhhs.ypack, Instagram, same handle at bhhs.ypack. Don't forget to subscribe, comment, and like, and we'll see you guys next time.